So there's a famous Agadic, and feel free to ask questions during our learning together, whatever you're doing, feel free. There's a famous question, Agadic story, or there's a famous Agadic story about Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. They say the same thing about Rav Chaim from Brisk. But the story is that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter on Yom Kippur morning in the 1830s during the cholera epidemic, and Yom Kippur morning got up, made kiddush, and ate in front of the whole community. And of course, there's always lay leaders, congregants who think they know better than the rabbi. So they asked him, Rabbi, how could you be mechalel? How could you desecrate or mevazeh, or basically in some ways destroy the integrity of this holy day of Yom Kippurim by eating? And his response was that it's not that I'm makil on laws of Yom Kippur, but rather I'm machmir on the laws of Pekuach Nefesh. That's what his comment was. And indeed, that issue is something that's very important. And we see that in a few different laws. For example, in the source number 1, this is an encyclopedia known as the Stei Chamet. It speaks about the following. Can you guys see the sources? Can you see them? Okay, great. He says the following: Masha omrim harofim hamumchim, the expert doctors. If someone leaves their house, if he leaves basically, or she leaves their houses basically without eating, the blood is on their head in the time of cholera, God forbid, that they put themselves at risk. So muvan mizeh, we can understand from here, that if they wouldn't leave their home on Yom Kippur, they wouldn't go to synagogue, they wouldn't go to shul, the fast wouldn't really hurt them. In Cain, b'Yom Kippur, it's better for them to fast. And they should stay b'bidud, they should stay quarantined in their home. They should daven b'chidut, by themselves. They shouldn't read from the Torah. We don't want to transgress a biblical prohibition of not fasting. However, it goes on further. But if the experts say, "Hey, listen, that we need to, in order for the cholera epidemic not to affect us, shatanit atzmo magzik, that the fast hurts us no matter what." Like the Magen Avram says in Siman Tov Kuf Ayin Vav Siv Kat and Bet, you shouldn't fast, and let the doctors tell you how much you have to eat. If you can eat less than the requisite amount that still allows you to fast biblically, you should do that. If not, you should eat what you need to eat. This idea is also found, in other literature. For example, the Khatam Sofer writes the following. Khatam Sofer, not known as a moderate, he writes the following. He writes that if the doctors say that you need to eat on Yom Kippur, you need to eat, because the most important thing is Pikuach Nefesh. We're more concerned about your life than we are about fasting on Yom Kippur. B'chai b'hem. We want you to live through the mitzvot. This idea is also highlighted in the Shulchan Aruch, where the Shulchan Aruch reminds us in source number 3, Mi sheyesh lo choli shel sakana, someone's in danger, mitzvah l'chalel lavat Shabbat. The most important thing is to be mechalel the Shabbat, is to desecrate, in quotes, the Shabbat. V'hazariz hareza meshubach, and the faster you do that, the best. V'ashoel, it's not the time to ask questions. If somebody's searching to ask those questions at the time in which they need to do and help somebody who's in an emergency, they're like a quasi-murderer. And the Mishnah Berurah goes on and says more. The Katvu Hachronim, the Huadin, the Achronim, right, the commentators on the Shulchan Aruch, Bishvil Choleh HaCholeh Shu Safek Sakana, even in a case in which there's a Choleh who's a Safek Sakana, We're not sure if it's dangerous or not, but there's a chance. Gam kein mutar lechapot. It's also permitted to violate even a biblical prohibition. That is the clear and most important idea that we need to understand, and that is the halachic responsibility that we have in order to preserve life. And I think that that is a critical, important thing that we need to struggle with when we answer halachic questions in the time of Corona. And that is, how do we make sure that we're following halacha and the tradition of halacha, and not compromising that tradition, but recognizing that part of the tradition of halacha is to be concerned about life. And the second piece is to make sure that we are being empathetic, we're showing proper respect or proper needs, or being sensitive to the needs of others. So let's look at some of the halachot that rabbis got. And as Or Torah Stone has 300 rabbis around the world, particularly in South America, as well as in Europe and other places. And we got different questions. A lot of these questions weren't really answered by me. They were answered by people like Rav Schechter and Rabbi Willig and Rav Asher Weiss. I asked Rabbi Schechter some of my questions. Some of them actually he wrote up. He wrote up like 25 questions that were asked. 2 of the 25 are questions that that we discussed. We're going to go through one of them today. But this one is a question I don't really think requires asking somebody who's a significant posek. This is a pretty simple question, even though it's one that represents a struggle. And that is, and thank God things have quieted down a little bit, but for many, many weeks, the hospitals all over the world were totally filled. My daughter works at Mount Sinai Hospital. She actually got corona there. Thank God she's doing fine, but she works at Mount Sinai Hospital. Even the lobbies were filled with patients. They even opened up a annex to the hospital in Central Park on the Great Lawn. And the hospitals are full. And not only that, but you can't go visit patients because of the challenges and the concerns of corona. So the question is, are you permitted to call on Shabbat or Yom Tov to the doctor or the nurse and ask the doctor and the nurse how the patient is doing, a patient that may have corona or other disease or other sickness that you're concerned about, in order to make sure that someone's looking out for them? Normally you would stay in the hospital with them and you would be their advocate. But if you can't do that, are you allowed to call on Shabbat and Yom Tov in order to help that patient? And perhaps if you speak to the doctor or the nurse, there's a better chance that they'll be looked after as opposed to ignoring them, let's say over a 3-day Yom Tov, like it happened on the 2 days of Pesach and Shabbat. So let me ask you that question. What do you guys think? Is it permitted to call when you have concerns, or is it forbidden to call, since normally it's forbidden to use a telephone on Shabbat and Yom Tov? What would you think in this particular case?
It is allowed.
Okay, why?
I'm not sure. I just think it is.
Okay, well, it's nice to know that your hunch is correct, but it's also would be not. Why do you think, or if someone can help? Yes, it's a suffix b'kuach nefesh. We're living in a significantly dangerous time. It's not the time to go visit hospitals. They don't even let you go visit hospitals. You have to be concerned about the patient. And therefore, to pick up a phone on Shabbat or Yom Tov and simply ask or advocate for the patient would be permitted, even though we don't normally permit use of telephones on Shabbat or Yom Tov. But in this case, I think it would be permitted for the reasons we just said. It's a suffix b'kuach nefesh. In the same way, you would be permitted for a suffix b'kuach nefesh to do an issa d'oraisa, namely extinguish a flame or things of that nature. Or in this case, talking on the phone is probably an issa d'rabanan, so that would be permitted also. What about the following case? You have an elderly parent or grandparent, and the doctors are concerned they have to be alone, but the doctors are concerned that he or she might get depressed. And it's a 3-day Yom Tov. And you're worried about this depression. The doctors aren't sure that there'll be depression, as if they would sure there would be a definite pikuach nefesh. But they're not sure, but they have some concerns. Can you call your grandmother or grandfather who's living alone, or a member of the family, or a relative, or not even a member of the family, who you are concerned that the depression of being alone might make that person compromise their life, either psychologically or physically? Psychologically is as challenging as physically from a halakha perspective. So could you call that person on Shabbat or the Chagim? What do you think?
Yes, they did on Pesach.
I'm sorry?
People did on Pesach. Like that was kind of what
Was
the
that the day of
posting said.
Pesach? Yes, but Ayala, why is that true? Why? You're right.
Because again, it's mental health is a factor when in Pikuach Nefesh.
Exactly. So these are the halachot that we learned that help us answer those types of questions. Okay? Let's go on to another example of an issue that was really challenging, really challenging, that thank God wasn't challenging in America, but was challenging in other places. Here's the question. In Europe and other places like Singapore, Buenos Aires, and in other places in Europe, there was a rule for a while that they wanted anyone who had corona for the body to be cremated because they were concerned about somebody else getting corona. And not only that, the rule in most communities outside of, Israel, it's not an issue, but outside of Israel is that if a Jew decides and signs a contract to cremate their body, we don't let them be buried in a Jewish cemetery. The reason for that is we don't want people to cremate their bodies. It's a desecration of the body. It's 100% forbidden from the biblical perspective, from a Torah perspective. So we don't want them to do it, so we don't let them be buried in a Jewish cemetery. So here's the question. The question is, what happens if in a certain country, it's not the person who passed away, it's not the deceased, it's not that person who wanted his body to be, or her body to be cremated. It's a requirement of the state because he or she had corona. Can that person then be buried in a Jewish cemetery when the cremation is not a factor of his or her responsibility, his or her signing a contract and basically preparing for that, but rather it is something that happened because the state demanded it? The state. Yes, Leah.
I feel like they should be allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, given that it's a state mandatory thing, and it'd be a bigger dishonor to this person to not bury them in a Jewish cemetery because of this.
Okay. Anyone want to add?
If they're getting cremated because of the law, then it's not, and you're following the law, you're supposed to be law-abiding citizens, that's more important, then like why should one affect the other?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah. If it's because it's a safek pikuach nefesh for other people, and that's why the state is doing that, then it would have the same rules as the other questions.
Okay, I'm not sure it has exact same rules, but I agree with your perspective. I actually took a pretty strong stand on this, just like you guys just did, and felt that in cases of this nature, the body should be buried for a few different reasons. And let me share them with you. Give me a second. Let me share them with you, the reasons. Sorry. So my reasons were the following. They were basically your reasons, but let me first of all, just an interesting halacha. once a body is cremated, it no longer has a halacha of being tameh. In other words, there's no tumah for a kohen, and that's what we see in source 4, the Mishnah and Olos. Chachamim mitarim efer srufim. Once the body loses its status of a body, there's no longer a skeleton or anything else of the nature, just ash. No longer has the chaloshem, the status of a body, then there's no issue of tumah. So to bury it because of tumah reasons is not a good enough reason. However, the Rambam says in source number 5, based on the Gemara in Tamura, that in a case in which you're supposed to bury a body, whether it's animal body you did a sacrifice on, or a human body, kol hanikbarim, anything that requires burial, afaram asur. Their ashes are asur bahanar, forbidden to have pleasure from. B'chol nisrafin, and anything that can be burnt, afaram mutar, then the ashes are permitted. So the bottom line here is this person who tragically died from corona, and therefore the government demanded that the body should be burnt, their ashes are still asur bahana. You can't have pleasure from them. Burial allows us to make sure that you don't in any ways compromise those ashes. The next thing is that, and I think this is what you were all saying, and that is we have to show empathy to the family. The family just lost a loved one. The family is going through a challenging time. The parent didn't want their body to be burnt, to be destroyed this way. They had no choice because it's a government mandate. And they have suffered enough. So to bury the ashes in a Jewish cemetery is not just a tribute to the deceased, it also pays honor to the living. Furthermore, there's also this notion of tchiyat hametim, that we want God to resurrect all of us. It doesn't mean that we have to be buried, fully with a full body. We even see in source 6 a very famous story of 400 young men and young women who were captured by the Romans and were going to be brought to Rome to be used in various forms of prostitution. They commit suicide on their way to Rome. And the Gemara in source 6 speaks about the fact that even though they're buried at sea, they jumped off the boats and they drowned, that tchiyat hametim, resurrection of the dead, can happen even when someone's buried at sea. So I felt like you all felt this way, and I actually, there was articles in the Times of Israel and other places that indicated that I said that it said something like, see if I can find it for a second, but it basically said something like, Rabbi says it's okay for cremation, which is not what I said. But, I don't have to tell you guys, that headlines are headlines and headlines sell papers. So they basically put this whole thing out. It was a little bit complicated, a little uncomfortable for a bit. But I'll show it to you for a second. Hold on. I just did a search on it while I was talking to you. So the Times of Israel had this article. State-mandated cremation is a posthumous mitzvah, says leading Orthodox rabbi. Okay, they're wrong about the leading Orthodox rabbi part. And it's true that I did say that, like you all said, there's pekuach nefesh, and therefore it can be some type of mitzvah. As you can see from the shares, it went around 2,836 shares. I don't normally look at this stuff, but my kids do. And there were a lot of comments, let's just say, about this thing that I said. But most important thing is that while the headlines were quite bombastic, the truth is that if you looked in the a leading Orthodox ruled that Jewish communities in Europe should embrace cremation if the government requires it. That's what you guys said also. But I said it's 100% asur. It's 100% forbidden. But He said in his comments that mitzvah cremation apply only in the cases where government decides that cremation is necessary for public health, and therefore wouldn't apply. And it also quotes me as saying that cremation is normally 100% forbidden. But to say that that because of that reason you don't give honor to the deceased, that's totally inappropriate. Now, what happened here, it says, Brander explained that Jewish prohibition of cremation stems from the Hebrew Bible. It says that you're not allowed to do cremation, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what happened was that the Jewish Week actually didn't interview me. They took the headlines, and they didn't give the caveats in the article itself. They just took the headline. They didn't speak to me. They didn't anything. And then the people at Torah had to have a conversation with them that you don't quote somebody during this very, very, very challenging time without even picking up a phone and asking me my opinion. And therefore, they had to print an online immediate, basically, apology and change it. And then a week later, in type point that's not bigger than 10 point, they apologized. But it was a little bit challenging because all of a sudden the rabbis around the world that we have relationships with are seeing this Jewish Week article as if I'm not concerned about cremations, where you and I just discussed all of the challenging issues. And there was a second issue that we discussed, that we dealt with, and that's the following. And here's the real issue that we had, and that is what happens, and this happened in a lot of governments in Europe. The government said, listen, Jews bury fast, others don't. So if you bury within 24 hours, we'll let you bury a body, even that's corona. But after 24 hours, anybody that had corona, because we don't want anyone else to get the disease, has to be cremated. So what happens if someone dies on Friday night? They die on Friday night, and if we wait till Saturday night, Sunday, we're going to have to cremate the body. But if we bury on Shabbat through non-Jews, we can bury without cremating the body. That's the questions that we started to get. So you guys were no longer in session, so I couldn't ask you your opinion. But I'm asking you your opinion now. What do you think?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. The states, countries around Europe and South America made a rule that if somebody had corona and died from it, if they're not buried within 24 hours, you have to burn the body. Someone dies Friday night from corona. If you wait till Motzei Shabbat Sunday to bury them, you'll have to burn the body. Can you bury on Shabbat with a non-Jew and therefore stop the need to cremate the person? Bury on Shabbat with a non-Jew, or cremate the body on Sunday morning and keep the Shabbat? Understand the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, what do you guys think?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, sure.
What are the halachic problems with burying someone on Shabbos? If you had, like, if the non-Jew is burying, like, what other halachic issues would there be?
Okay, well, we don't ask non-Jews to do anything on Shabbat. It's
Right.
not like,
I'm saying, so
get
taking
out of jail free card.
right.
Amir La'akum is only permitted, when it's in particular, when it's an Issa D'Rabbanan, and in particular cases where it helps the spirit of Shabbat and things of that nature. It's called Shvus to Shvus b'makom mitzvah. I'm not sure that's in that category. It's not a celebration of Shabbat to bury the body. So this is an example of a case. Well, what do you guys think?
I'm just not sure what takes precedent, whether Shabbos is more important, like a dead body, burying the body by a dead person, or burning the body. I'm not sure that.
That was exactly my issue. So on this, I went to Rabbi Schechter and I asked him the question. And a very famous rabbi in Israel, we asked him the question also. His name is Rabbi Raza, who's a pretty big expert in this stuff. So he asks, or Rav Schechter writes, in Be'ezim Medinot Yachrizu, they'll announce, Shekol Shalom Yanichu Likbor Tameis B'Shabbat B'Yom Moto Yisrafu et Gufo. If they don't bury within 24 hours on Shabbat, they'll burn the body. Nira Pashut Shesrichim Livchor B'Miut Hara. You have to choose the better of two evils, so to say. And based on the Gemara in Eruvin on Daf Kuf, that sometimes you have to choose the best of two bad things, or two options. He said that it's permitted to tell a non-Jew to bury the body on Shabbat. And that's what we did. We told our rabbis that they're allowed to bury the body on Shabbat with non-Jews, not with Jews. But in honesty, most burials are happening anywhere in the world right now, except for Israel, but even in America, no Jews are burying bodies right now. They're using professional grave diggers because they are concerned about the spread of infection. So all of those issues, in many ways, non-Jews are burying anyways because of the reality of the current situation. So that's what we did. Okay? So I just wanted to give you first two examples of things that have to do with what I would call pretty serious issues that had to do with questions that we were getting, especially in the first week or two, pre-Pesach in particular, during the Corona issue. Now I'd like to actually talk about two issues that are not as challenging as these, but they're what I would say more halacha l'maisa, more relevant. And that is taking haircuts during Sfira. We normally have a tradition that we don't take haircuts either. There's three traditions, and they're basically started in the Middle Ages, not because of the death of Rabbi Akiva's students, but because of the challenges that happened with the Crusaders, which particularly happens during this period of time. That's why we have a tradition, even when you bench Rosh Chodesh, we say Avarachamim, because the prayer of Avarachamim was made for the First Crusade, the destruction of the communities of Speyer, Worms, and Mainz. And there is actually some interesting things about taking haircuts. When do you take haircuts? Some people don't take haircuts between Pesach and Shavuot. Some people don't take haircuts from Pesach to Lag BaOmer. Some people stop taking haircuts from Rosh Chodesh Iyar. But the bottom line is, in our time, when in America are haircut places closed or open?
Closed.
Closed. Okay. So so none of us took haircuts. Like, I don't need it as much as maybe some others, but the bottom line is that we didn't take even haircuts before Pesach because they were already closed. At least in Israel, they were already closed by then. They closed like 2 weeks before Pesach. So the question that becomes, what can you take haircuts now? Let's say before Lag BaOmer, can you take haircuts now? And I think you are allowed to take haircuts now, and let me explain why. In source number 10, we learn what the laws are regarding haircuts. We don't take haircuts during Sfira because we treat Sfira like the Avelut, like the mourning that someone is mourning for, God forbid, the loss of a parent, the 12 months of loss for a parent. And the halacha is in source 10, Al kol meitim, on anyone who passes away, megaleach la'achar shloshim, you can start taking haircuts after 30 days, but al aviv al imo, on parents, ad shigaru bo chaverav, until your friends start to say, you got to take a haircut. You know, you look bad. It's time for you to take a haircut. And the Ramah writes, how long is that you need to take a haircut? V'shir gara, how long is that time, basically? Yesh bo plukta, there's an argument. V'nohagim b'gimel chadashim. If you haven't taken a haircut for 90 days, you're allowed to take a haircut. So if someone lost a loved one and they haven't taken a haircut for 90 days, then they're allowed to take a haircut after those 90 days. Why? How do you get to 90 days? The reason you get to 90 days is because that's twice the amount of time that in the time of Rav Moshe Isserles, people took haircuts. People took haircuts every month and a half or so. 3 months is twice that amount of time. Comes Rav Moshe Feinstein and says the following. In the time of the Ramah, people took haircuts only every 6 weeks. But in America and other places now, people take haircuts more than that. People take haircuts actually, they take it once a month or once every 5 weeks or so. So he says that you don't have to wait 3 months, but only 2 months. This is, look what see what I have underlined here? L'chein mistaber shishnei pa'amim gefi haragilo, that twice the amount of time based on what's normal. Who shir hatzar l'cho medina kehargala l'cho yachid kehargalo. It's based on every single person, what their norm is. V'kiven de bedera klau mistaprim b'chol chodesh o l'shisha shvuot. You normally take a haircut once a month or once every 6 weeks. The amount of time that is considered shiur ga'ara, that the amount of time that you have to wait when you're in a velut of the year, which is what every Jew is in a velut during the month, during Sfirat HaOmer, is 2 or 3 months. So while the Ramah, he says, it was 3 months because they took haircuts in his time only once every month and a half, if you take haircuts or trims less than that, you're allowed to, once you've passed twice the amount of time that you normally take a haircut, let's say 2 months or 2.5 months, you're allowed to take a haircut because you fully have commemorated the Avelut Dishana, the Avelut of the year. You're still fulfilling the responsibilities of Sfirat HaOmer. So let's say, I remember the last time I took a haircut was a week before my grandson's Brit. So it was like a week before Shabbat Zachor. Okay, so like I can take a haircut now because that's past 2 months. And, I think I'm going to do one right before Shabbat. So I get that extra Erev Shabbat thing to it. But I don't have to wait until Lag BaOmer, even though Lag BaOmer is literally a few days afterwards. But the bottom line is, the halacha says that I normally this is not a relevant halacha because you take a haircut before Pesach and you're 2 or 3 months, you're already to finish Sfirat HaOmer, right? It's only 49 days max. You don't have this issue. But if you understand the roots, no pun intended, of the halacha here, then you understand that once you've passed what's called Avelut Deshana, the Avelut of the year, which is basically not taking a haircut for somewhere between 2 and 3 months or 2.5 months, according to Rav Moshe Feinstein, you no longer have the halachic responsibility to still not take a haircut because you have passed the mourning, you have fulfilled the mourning period that is required for somebody who is commemorating a loss within the year, which is what a Jew is part of during the time of Avelut of Sfirat HaOmer. Anyone have any questions what I said? Any questions? Is that so simple? You guys got it?
I have a question.
Please.
So if it's because like they weren't able to get a haircut before Pesach because everything was closed, okay, fine. But like, what if like the person who cuts your hair is in your family and like you just didn't cut your hair before Pesach? Would the same like thing apply?
Well, if you didn't cut your hair before Pesach simply because you just didn't get around to it, I still think it would still apply. Because I don't think it's about, shame on you, you didn't take your haircut before Pesach. If you didn't need one before Pesach, that's fine. The same way, since I cut my hair, which is not something that takes too long, before my grandson's Brit, which was right before Purim. I didn't need a haircut before Pesach, so I'm not penalized. I didn't take a haircut before Pesach. Once I passed that 2.5 month period, I have fulfilled the mourning responsibilities of Avelut Shana.
If you
Yes.
didn't,
Sorry.
if you didn't know you were mourning, so it's like retroactively saying.
Yeah, it's not about knowing that you're mourning. That's not the thing here. The thing my point is, the reason why we don't take haircut, we wait that long, is because anyone during Sfirat Omer has the status of a mourner of the year. That's why we don't do certain things. And therefore, once you have fulfilled the obligations of a mourner of a year, which is not taking a haircut for twice as long as you normally would, you're permitted to take that haircut.
So would that work on a regular year too?
Would it work on a regular year?
Like if there's no corona and you just happen to go double amount of time than normal because something happened in your life, I don't know, you just didn't end up getting a haircut.
Yeah, unless I would say, unless it was laziness and you just said, hey, listen, I don't really need a haircut and I'm just going to take a middle Sphira, I wouldn't be so comfortable letting you do that. But if it was because, God forbid, you got stuck somewhere, or God forbid, you were hospitalized or something else of that nature, which is not within your thing, then like this year, then I would be totally comfortable telling you what we just talked about. Yes, Leah.
Does that like 2 or 3 month time period apply to everyone? Like, what if a man cuts his hair every 2 weeks, and now because of Corona, it's been like 3 months already?
Yeah, so that's a great question, but I think you have to, it has to be a normative period of time. But Moshe Feinstein, I'm bringing you that. He said, you have to follow what the norm is, I think, in each country. So I think, you can get away with saying you take a haircut once a month, and therefore twice that time is 2 months, but I wouldn't be comfortable saying twice the time is 1 month. Okay, I want to discuss one more thing with you because I felt we would discuss like 2 very challenging things, like the first 2 things we discussed. And we would discuss 2 things that might be more, thank God, relevant to you, as opposed to, thank God, the things that we discussed in the beginning that, thank God, aren't too relevant to you. Thank God. Music during Sphira. Some people have the tradition not to listen to music and definitely not to play musical instruments during Sphira. Proactive mourning. What about this year? Should you stop playing instruments? Let's say you love playing an instrument, don't normally play during Sphira, and do not listen to music. It's not like about going to concerts, because there aren't any concerts around right now. So the Shulchan Aruch in Hilchot Avelut, Siman Shin Ayin Daled, which is source 13, says the following very interesting halacha. Yesh omrim, b'shat hadever, in a time of a plague, ein me'ablim, you don't mit'ablim, you don't even mourn shiva, according to some. Mishum bi'ituta, because we're concerned about your mental health. We're concerned about anguish. We're concerned about things of that nature. Vishamati, says the Shulchan Aruch, tzat nagu kain, that some follow this tradition of not mourning, not even sitting shiva, which is not the norm. And I actually would think that sitting shiva, even a Zoom shiva, has psychological benefits to it. But the point that the Shulchan Aruch is making, and that is that Avelut, even Shiva, we're not so strict on during the time of a plague if we're worried about your mental health, the psychological consequences of maybe sitting Shiva. The Aruch HaShulchan, one of the, who put together a sefer on the Torah Tamima, basically it's the same author of the Torah as the Torah Tamima. He writes the following: V'yesh omrim, shebeshas hamagefa, in the time of a plague, ein mit ablim, you don't sit shiva, or you don't mourn at all, mishum bi'ituta, because again of psychological concerns, anguish, anxiety, V'shamati k'tzat nagu kain. And I heard that some follow this, ad kan lashono. This is also the language of the Shulchan Aruch. Now he continues, and he says the following. Ubavadai, and surely, im yesh chashash pachad, if there is some type of psychological concerns. Bazeh have kipekuach nefesh, that is like pekuach nefesh, even if we're not 100% sure, but there is a concern of pekuach nefesh. V'chein nirali, and therefore I would like to suggest that in a case of this nature, the chol chola, any person who's a chola, av she'ein bo sakana, even if there's no danger, like every one of us who is being cautious and careful now, even though, thank God, we're not in any dangers. Im ha'avilut yigrom tosefet choli, if there's a chance that the mourning will add to your anxiety, ein lo lehatabel, you shouldn't do that. Now, I'm not suggesting that anyone shouldn't sit shiva. That's not what I'm suggesting. But the point is that any aspect of mourning has to be evaluated through the lens of how we're doing right now when we have additional anxiety. The idea of not listening to music is not because of not listening to music because we're sitting shiva. It's because of the avelut. It's because of the mourning that one would have during the year. And so, therefore, for this reason, I think that this year, there's no problem with listening to music. In fact, Rabbi Schechter writes a tshuva about this also, that he feels there's no problem with listening to music, and feels that you can also play instruments. He actually feels, okay, I've been corrected here, you might be right, that the Aruch HaShulchan is the father of the Torah Tamima. I'll have to check that out, but I stand corrected, thank you. The point is that in our day and age, during this period of time, I think that you don't have to be concerned about not listening to music, because we have to be concerned about our mental health. And here the Shulchan Aruch clearly says, in fact, Rabbi Schechter went so far as to say that if somebody during Shiva was concerned about their mental health, he would permit them to listen to music this year. And he said he waived, basically, not waived, the Shulchan Aruch waives, the Aruch HaShulchan waives, this prohibition of not keeping certain laws of avelut during this period of time when we're worried about our mental health. So for that reason, those of you who may enjoy playing an instrument and it gives you some type of serenity, peace of mind, in the present matzav, I wouldn't say this for every year, but in the present situation, I think it's permitted to play the instrument and to listen to music, because we're in Shas Magefa. There are tens of thousands of people dying all around us. That's a real Magefa. And therefore, I think it is permitted to listen to music this year. Any questions? Yes.
Again, just
Am I on? You want to go? Sure.
it's okay. I'll go for it.
I have a question, which is like, for me, for instance, like I'm not experiencing Corona as like powerful or as harsh as many families are. So do you decide based on your own situation whether the music and those types of things apply, or is that a general ruling?
I think it's a general ruling this year. Any other questions? Not just me thinks it. That's what Rabbi Schechter and Rabbi Willig wrote. It's not just me. It's important to realize that. Any other questions? Okay, great. So listen, please all stay safe as you continue to learn virtually with your wonderful Ramim and Ramiot. And and take care of yourselves. You're all important, and you need to make sure that you're finding time to take care of yourselves and be safe. And even though you all think that you're invincible because you're young, unfortunately, no one's invincible during this period of time. And you really need to make sure that you take the proper precautions. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thanks.
Take care. All right. Bye-bye.